Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War News Update. First part there for the 13th of April 2024. Sorry I'm a little bit late. I had to go to a Suns football match and whatnot. If I'm cognitively a little impaired today, as many of you know, I have primary progressive multiple sclerosis. I was wondering why I've been unable to pretty much walk for the last 5 days, for 3 to 5 days. And I'm coming down with something. My immune system, I had stem cell therapy in Moscow in 2019, and my immune system is not as good as it should be with having had aggressive chemotherapy. So, when I get a little bit ill, a little bit of a whatever, then actually it completely affects my ability to do things like walk, and also might well affect my cognitive abilities. So if I struggle in this video with words and ideas and threading things together, apologies. Anyway, let's get to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, and there are some insanely high numbers on this list. 1,030, so the Russians are back up to over 1,000 losses. This coincides with General Sursky saying that the Russians have picked up, he's talking about since the elections, that's March the 17th, that's a good almost month now of picking up, he says, as a result of the elections. I was previously saying that they're picking up before the elections, and once the election's over, they don't need to worry so much. He seems to be saying that things are pretty tough right at the moment in Ukraine, and that is a bit of an issue, and that could be why we're seeing really high losses for the Russians as they are attacking more. It has to be admitted that the Russians have lost a huge amount of equipment that we've seen visually confirmed. There's an awful lot of footage of many columns and attacks being repelled, equipment being lost, but they are grinding forward, and we'll come to talk about that in a little bit with reference to other sources. 23 tanks being lost in a single day is huge. It's an absolutely phenomenally high number. 47 armoured personnel vehicles is ridiculously large, and 32 artillery systems. And even if you don't believe these are accurate and take maybe a third off that, you still have phenomenally high numbers. That is still going to be 15 tanks. That's still going to be 30 something armored personnel vehicles and 20 something artillery systems. It's still a huge set of numbers, and that's if you're overcounting by a third. 3 multiple launch rocket systems, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, 57 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 5 pieces of special equipment. That is a very challenging day for the Russians, but in that being a challenging day for the Russians, you know it would have been challenging for the Ukrainians, because if they're pushing forward with that much equipment, to lose that much equipment, they are hitting against Ukrainian defences. I'm under the understanding that Bodanivka around Chasiv Yar is now under Russian hands. And the Ukrainians, I've heard that Ukraine is still fighting in the last streets of Ivanivska, which is interesting because there are claims that they weren't recently, now claims that they still are. So the end result is it's really tough around Chasiv Yar, and the Russians are making grinding gains in a number of places, but it comes at a huge cost. Andrew Perpetua's loss stats pretty much confirm this idea. Looking through the socials, we see about a 4-to-1 loss ratio of Russian to Ukrainian losses, which is just what the Ukrainians would want. When we look at the Ukrainian losses, remember yesterday they had some S-300s added to that, which is hugely valuable, and that pretty much did in what the Russians lost themselves. Today, the Ukrainians have lost, it seems, or at least there's visual evidence now coming to the fore that Ukrainians have lost at some point 2 BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket systems. The rest of the equipment isn't particularly high value, excavator and IMR, so you've got some engineering vehicles, but basically, the rest is fairly standard stuff. Lancets seem to be playing a problem at the moment, FPV drones as well, and then some mines and a few other unknowns. Right, let's look at the Russian losses. We've got a Tor M2 being taken out as an air defense system, being taken out by Gimlers, guided multiple launch rocket system, so something like a HIMARS delivering that, or a missile from a similar piece of kit, such as a Mars 2 or whatever. That is a fairly high value piece of kit for the Russians to lose. I think there's visual evidence. There's visual evidence of all of these. I've seen the video of that. 2 that's destroyed as well. 2 surveillance and comms pieces of equipment, some artillery in there, a number of tanks, including a T-90M, abandoned then hit by an incendiary bomb dropped by drone. That's not the first time. In fact, I think it's two consecutive days we've seen a T-90 taken out like that, abandoned and then hit by a drone, or a drone dropping something. A number of destroyed tanks and some more damaged ones, T-80s, T-72s, all different varieties there, and a lot of tanks really. Infantry fighting vehicles again taking one hell of a beating. BMP 1s, 2s and 3s, as well as BTRs, etc, etc. Some APCs, the older MTLB armoured personnel carriers, trucks and civilian vehicles, and 3 more golf carts taken out. Desert Cross 1000-3s. So that's just a huge, massive equipment, exactly what the Ukrainians would need, and the Russians are going to really struggle if they lose those kinds of numbers every day. In terms of personnel losses, just a bit of anecdotal evidence to support the claim that the Russians are losing a lot. Relatives of mobilized Russian soldiers from the 114th Meat Brigade are asking Putin and David Sachs to look into their situation. According to their message, the infamous brigade is pulling soldiers from territorial defense units to send them into meat assaults, resulting in losses of half of the personnel. This is yet another Russian video talking about people immediately ending up dead, morale being hit. Officers are not concerned about their soldiers. If you're killed, others will come. We need to go forward, so on and so forth. All the sorts of things that we've heard previously, but just another example of this. Then feeding into the idea that the Russians are losing many, many casualties. Of course, the Ukrainians are losing men too. In the Pokrovsk direction, so that's the Avdiivka area, and I've produced numbers or reference numbers on these the other day, some updated numbers. The Russians have lost 1,001 vehicles compared to the Ukrainians' 159, so that's over a 5-to-1 loss ratio in the Avdiivka region. The Russians really have had an incredibly difficult time in that direction, losing so much equipment. Now, War Translated translates some posts from a Russian Storm Z unit instructor, where he reflects the Russian on recent military operations, noting the increase in footage of Russian attacking columns being destroyed and simultaneous Ukraine's worsening situation simultaneously, which is exactly what I've noted, that there's just so much footage coming out, but the Ukrainians are in a really tough situation. So they are doing an amazing job of retreating the Russians, but it's just the overwhelming numbers eventually will win out if there is no end to those numbers. Despite some Russian tactical successes, advances are difficult, often leading to only minor gains due to the lack of support and poorly prepared units. Overall progress is attributed more to changes in firepower capabilities and Ukrainian weaknesses rather than improvements in combat effectiveness or organisational structure. So I would say much of the Russian gain at the moment, I'm not going to go into the detail of these posts. I will put them on the screen. You can read them, pause the video and read them. I would say this will have a lot to do with the use of carb bombs and the aviation that is able to absolutely hammer Ukrainian positions. It's not so much that the Russians are using particularly good maneuver tactics with their infantry fighting vehicles and troops and whatnot. The grinding successes come essentially on the back of planes just destroying Ukrainian positions, and then the Russians moving forward, taking one hell of a beating, but getting some men into new positions. So anyway, there you go. Yeah, but it's what he says at the end. I haven't even read this. In fact, our current advances are mainly due to two main factors: the increase in strike capabilities of our aviation, and at the same time, the enemy's decline in his own firepower capabilities, which he compensates to a large extent with strike drones. So, artillery ammunition not being there, trying to compensate with drones, and then we hammer them with aviation. And he says, but in no way a significant increase in the quality of our combat work, comprehensive saturation of our active enemy, and adequate technical means, optimization and updating of our organizational structures. In other words, we are crap, but we're only taking ground because Ukraine has run out of ammunition, thanks to partly to the US congressional impasse, and our use of guided glide bombs. Such an important component in this war, those bombs, and something desperately needs to be done about it. Richard Verreck has done a number of different analyses. This is just one of them. There's another one I was just reading in terms of BMP-3s. These are BTRs and BTR-82s. So BTR-80s have been gradually becoming less common among the losses so far this month, Of the 8 lost BTRs, all are BTR-82s. At the start of the war, there were BTR-80s in storage, but no BTR-82s. It seems that all or most have been upgraded to the BTR-82s, a more recent version. The above graph is a 3-month average, but I've added the first part of April as it follows the line down. I'm not saying that Russia has run out of BTR-80s, not yet, but it's not in production, and there may now be no more in storage, so it will eventually disappear. The data table here is there for those who care. So that is just another point that the Russians are cycling through equipment. They are using up some of their older variants of certain pieces, and then once they go, they go. That's it. And it's the question is always: are the Russians losing at unsustainable rates? Now here's the Tor M2 that's taken out of the Gimlers. HIMARS strike, it says, of the 9A331M Telar. That's the let's think about this: transport, erector, launcher, and radar of the Tor M2. So it does everything there, and that has been taken out. So that's an expensive piece of kit gone. Now this is an interesting bit of footage. This is a Russian drone following a Ukrainian helicopter, and this is worrying because actually I think we're soon going to get drones capable of taking out helicopters. If they can head them off at the pass, or if they can fire some munition off from them, there need to be larger drones obviously for that. But what's interesting here is the helicopter must have electronic warfare on board, because as the drone gets near, it's following that helicopter, pretty much keeping fairly. I mean, the helicopter is going a little bit faster than the drone, but we are getting to the stage where helicopters are going to have to think long and hard about how they operate with regard to drones, and obviously the countermeasures need to be put in place. But then the countermeasures kick into action, and the drone suddenly loses all connection to the controller, and that's the end of the drone. Which is obviously good news for the Ukrainians, but shows how the importance of countermeasures on things like helicopters. Right, and we know the Germans have actually been providing some really good counter equipment to the Ukrainians that they can put on their helicopters. I forget the name of it, but anyway, there are some decent bits of kit on Ukrainian helicopters. Right, moving on to distance strikes and ordnance and whatnot. Standoff munitions, more devastation in Kharkiv region overnight. Kupiansk is now back on the front line. Fierce fighting is taking place here, and the public suffer from Russia's terror shelling. So Kupiansk getting hammered. But actually, I couldn't find any information about the Russian use of missiles or drones. And so therefore, I conclude it was a very quiet night over Ukraine, and that's obviously good news for them. Now, this morning, there has been the sighting of cruise missiles, thought to be Storm Shadow Scalp EG cruise missiles hitting somewhere in Luhansk, caught on camera, pretty much striking as well. The Russians are claiming that this is a Taurus, and they're quite adamant about that, and saying that Germany's now providing Taurus to Ukraine. I mean, it'd be great if that's the case. I doubt it. Major fire, emergency services involved. Successful strike in Luhansk by Ukrainian defense forces. Lots of video footage about this strike, different angles, different points of time. Ukraine launched a missile strike on Luhansk. Occupied Luhansk. Local media reporting a strike on the location of a cluster of Russian vehicles near a machine building factory. I assume, especially when you're using something like a Storm Shadow, it's going to be the factory they're going for rather than time sensitive things like vehicles. You don't usually use those kind of missiles to take out vehicles, but it's just obviously good news if you can take out some vehicles nearby. We'll wait to see what the details are of that strike. This is concerning a strike or an attempted strike using drones, not last night but the night before. Trentelenko says, very nice. This removes most of the Russian extended early warning of PSU airstrikes now that the VKS A-50U fleet is grounded. So there's big radar planes, Trentelenko say, are now grounded. Astra reports that the 509th Separate Radio Engineering Centre is based on the territory of the settlement, armed with a container radar. The target detection range is about 3,000 kilometres. This command post at the unit is 650 kilometres from the border with Ukraine and was reportedly damaged. in a drone attack. So that is very good that the Ukrainians can strike at really particular important strategic targets deep within Russian territory with their drones, and apparently do some damage, possibly taking out the functionality of um, that radar system there. Uh, there has been the claim that the thermal power station, the Tripilska power plant that was taken out to the south of Kyiv, was taken out with 5 Kh-69, these newer cruise missiles that the Russians are using. It can be rebuilt, is the claim, but it's kind of pointless given the need for air defences and the lack of air defences, particularly around that power station. So, yeah, and it would take a long time, a lot of money, a lot of effort, but it can be rebuilt. Do you bother doing that if you don't have Patriots sitting around protecting that which is being built? Okay, we're going to talk a little bit in the next segment, but mainly in the next video, or in the geopolitical video, concerning some claims around oil refineries and why the US might be putting up some resistance to them. It might be coming from the oil industry, bit of lobbying going on there by the looks of it. Anyway, explosions in occupied Tokmak, so that's to the south of the Robotina salient, where the Ukrainians were expecting to end up during their, or as a result of their counteroffensive. Anyway, strikes there yesterday, apparently, according to the Russians, killed 6 people, including a child. The fake installed head of the occupied part of Zaporizhia, Yevgeny Balitsky, claimed there were also 20 injured. But what I think we can be sure of is that Ukrainians are still going for targets within Tokmak. I don't know the details of what they achieved. Now we're going to go on to other bits and pieces. And this is part of what I was going to talk to you about. So the IEA, is that the International Energy Agency, warns that attacks on Russian plants may disrupt the diesel market. Russia may have 500,000 to 600,000 barrels per day refining capacity offline. So far, the actual drop in throughput has been lower than estimated, though. And you can imagine that there are many in the industry putting some pressure on the US administration to message correctly about whether the Ukrainians should be hitting the oil refining infrastructure. There are so many arguments and counter arguments. Some people say that, well, to be honest, there's not going to be much international effect, or much effect on the international pricing and supply of those products, but other people say otherwise. The Ukrainian government has allocated an initial 3.88 billion, almost 100 million US dollars, 3.88 billion hryvnias, for the construction of fortifications, according to Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, and they are widespread. They're doing a lot in Kharkiv, a lot in Sumy, and then obviously Donetsk, Kherson, and Mykolaiv too. Some of them are more deterrents, like I think up in Sumy and Kharkiv, we heard Lukashenko say yesterday, we're not going to invade from Belarus because it's just too difficult to get across the border. So there's going to be a lot of that going on, and to put the Russians off from attacking down from Kursk, Bryansk, Belgorod regions. And part of it will be in preparation for the Russians to actually advance on positions, much more concerned with the actual front line where fighting is taking place. The next few months will be the toughest period for Ukraine, says Bloomberg. According to the publication sources, the country is in the most precarious position of the entire war due to severe shortages of ammunition, manpower, and gaps in air defense supplies. This will allow the Kremlin to launch a decisive offensive. Quote, Moscow plans to stockpile 6 million shells, increasing production and purchases from North Korea and Iran, said the publication sources. The US sees no signs of an imminent breakthrough by Russian sources, but admits the risk of a split in the Ukrainian army due to falling morale among the population. But then there are other sources. So a candid message from Ukraine's Chief General Syrsky: the situation along Ukraine's eastern front has significantly worsened, that's his quote, in recent days. Russian forces have upped their attacks since Russia's presidential elections, he wrote on Telegram. Russia's attacks have been aided by the dry, warm weather, making terrain accessible to tanks, and its forces periodically achieving tactical successes, he said. Syrskyi said that work is underway to strengthen Ukraine's electronic warfare and anti-tank and armoured vehicle defence systems to, quote, stabilise the situation and inflict maximum enemy losses. Now, it's a good time for the Russians to attack for many reasons, but the Russians are also taking huge losses, remember. But if they can sustain those huge losses and Ukraine can't, then you could get to this point. So Bloomberg, Ukraine army collapse cannot be ruled out. So that same article is talking about how, yeah, we don't think they're going to collapse, but it can't be ruled out, according to a US official. The collapse of Ukraine's army cannot be ruled out at its most fragile moment in over 2 years of war. So they are under an awful lot of pressure, the Ukrainians, and they are really needing that bill to go through Parliament, not Parliament, through Congress. It's looking, goodness me, Mike Johnson is, I never liked him anyway. I despise him as a human being now more than words can communicate. And yesterday is just more evidence that he is exactly the person that so many people are claiming him to be. Russia continues to go underwater. There's a risk of another dam break. Russian media report that the level of the Ural River in Orenburg has risen again. It's now 11.62 meters, where the maximum allowable value is 9 meters 30. A full evacuation of the population has been announced in the Gazodobychov settlement. Quote, as the flood level continues to rise, there is a real risk of a dam break, the Orenburg District Administration reported. The water level of the Tobol River in Kurgan rose by 7 centimeters and reached 4 meters 16 for 12 hours. Big water is expected here in 4 days, so locals were urged to leave a month's supply of their own fresh water. It's not looking good for the Russians, and there's so much imagery coming out of like proper flooding of, well, this is Orenburg, where buildings are almost entirely underwater. It's just really high water. And what is the Russian government going to be doing about this? How much is it going to cost them? What effect will this have on their ability to fund their own war efforts? Water continues to flow in 39 Russian regions. About 12,700 houses are submerged due to flooding. The evacuation of local residents continues in Russia's Kurgan. A siren is howling, urging people to leave their homes immediately, according to a report in the Ministry of Emergency Situations in Russia. Lots of footage I could show you, but you get the idea. It is not looking good in Russia. So I'm going to leave you with, well, the bad news is here that the Russians have been bombing the heck out of Sumy, the region, and as a whole. And I presume the town or the city, a video to restore some faith in humanity, says Anton Grishchenko. Rescuers in Sumy saved 5 tiny puppies while fighting with fire in a building. Look at the mum, all worried. Thankfully, the pups are fine. They'll be given back to their mother. So just something to play out for you. A bit of feel good about puppies being saved. Look how worried she is.
Та вода там нора у них, походу, понял?
Да не, живой.
Давай куда-нибудь, я не знаю, там десь якісь.
Чорне, бідне.
Блядь, ёб. Давай. Все, забирай. Последний, блядь. Тихо. Да. Ой, блядь, иди сюда. Ты живой.
Під час гасіння пожеж було вперше врятовано 500 синят.
All in a day's work. Anyway, something positive there for you. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. It might well even be a live. I don't know. A day is escaping me, and I have an awful lot of content still to share with you. Anyway, keep your eyes peeled. Speak soon.